Introduction. The hidden language of human behavior. Imagine you could sit across from anyone, a job interviewer, a first date, a difficult colleague, a new business partner, and within the first few minutes, read them like a familiar book. You notice the slight tension in their jaw when they mention their boss. You catch the way their eyes light up when they talk about their daughter. You sense the careful phrasing they use around certain topics and understand that those hedged words are guarding something they do not want you to see. This is not fantasy. This is exactly what skilled social observers do every day, and here is the part that should both humble and inspire you. Most of what they are reading is not hidden at all. It is right there, in plain sight, broadcast constantly by every person in every interaction. The problem is not that people are mysterious. The problem is that most of us have never been taught to look. Human beings are social animals. We evolved over millions of years in tightly bonded groups where our survival depended on our ability to read each other, to detect deception, identify allies, sense danger, and communicate loyalty. That ancient social circuitry still runs in every human brain on the planet. What has changed is not the hardware, but our awareness of it. Dr. Albert Mehrabian's research at UCLA in the 1960s, one of the most cited studies in communication science, famously suggested that only 7% of emotional communication is carried in the actual words we speak. The remaining 93% is distributed between tone of voice 38% and body language 55%. While later researchers have qualified and nuanced these figures in specific contexts, the core insight remains durable. The words are just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath them lies an enormous mass of signal, meaning, and truth. The 48 laws in this book are organized into 8 interconnected parts. We begin with the foundation, the core principles of human nature that underpin all social behavior. Then we move through observation, influence, personality archetypes, group dynamics, high-stakes reading, self-projection, and, finally, practical application. You can read this book cover to cover, or you can use it as a reference, dipping into whichever law speaks to your current situation. Either way, I want you to approach each chapter the way you would approach a conversation with a wise friend, open, curious, and willing to see yourself as much as you see others. Because here is the deepest truth in all of social intelligence. The clearest window into other people is always first a clear understanding of yourself. Let us begin. Part 1. The Foundation, Understanding Human Nature. Before you can read anyone, you must understand what drives everyone. The 6 laws in this section are your bedrock, the non-negotiable truths about human psychology that make all other observation possible. Law 1. Every person wears a mask. Here is a truth about people that most of us quietly know but rarely say out loud. No one is exactly who they appear to be. Every person walking through your life is wearing, to some degree, a social mask, a carefully and often unconsciously constructed version of themselves designed for public consumption. This is not a flaw in human character, it is a feature. It is how we navigate the endlessly complex demands of social life. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychiatrist, whose influence on modern psychology is immeasurable, called this mask the persona. He borrowed the term from the Latin word for the masks worn by actors in ancient Greek theatre. According to Jung, the persona is the face we present to the world, shaped by our upbringing, our culture, our professional roles, and our need for social acceptance. It is not fake in a cynical sense. It is simply not the whole person. Think about someone you know well, a close friend, a sibling, a long-term partner. Now think about how they behave at work, or at a formal dinner, or when meeting someone they want to impress. Chances are they are recognizably themselves in all these situations, but not quite the same in each one. There is a softening here, a sharpening there, a topic they avoid, a posture they adopt. That is the persona at work. Now think about yourself. How do you present in job interviews versus Friday nights with your oldest friends? The difference between those two versions of you is not deception. It is adaptation, one of the most sophisticated social tools the human species has ever developed. The problem arises when we mistake the mask for the face. When we accept someone's social presentation at face value and never ask what lies beneath, we set ourselves up for misunderstanding, surprise, and betrayal. History is full of leaders who appeared confident but were privately consumed by self-doubt. Partners who seemed warm but harbored deep resentment. Colleagues who projected competence while quietly sabotaging those around them. Research in social psychology consistently shows that people are poor judges of character in first impressions. A landmark 1993 study by psychologists Nalini Ambady and Robert Rosenthal at Harvard introduced the concept of thin slicing. The idea that we make rapid, often surprisingly accurate judgments about people from very brief exposures. But crucially, thin slicing works best for immediate emotional states and worst for deep character traits. We can quickly sense that someone is nervous or happy, but we are remarkably bad at detecting long-term patterns of trustworthiness, ambition, or loyalty from a single interaction. So what is the practice? It is this: begin every new relationship, professional, personal, romantic, with the quiet understanding that what you see is the opening chapter of a much longer story. Maintain respectful curiosity. Notice when behavior seems inconsistent with stated values. Pay attention to moments when the mask slips. Stress, alcohol, fatigue, deep emotion, because these are the windows through which the real person briefly looks out at you. The most important thing is not to become cynical. Recognizing that everyone wears a mask does not mean assuming the worst of everyone. It means building your understanding of people slowly, from evidence rather than from first impressions. The best human beings you will ever know are not the ones who appeared perfect from the start. They are the ones whose reality, gradually revealed, turned out to be even richer and more worthy of your trust than their persona suggested. Approach every person as a mystery worth solving patiently, and you will rarely be betrayed by your own assumptions. Law 2. Emotions always leak. No matter how composed a person appears, their true emotional state is always finding a way to the surface. This is not a weakness specific to certain people. It is a biological fact about all human beings. We are emotional creatures first and rational creatures second, and our bodies were designed to broadcast our feelings to those around us long before language existed to name them. The concept that gave this insight its scientific backbone is the micro-expression. Brief, involuntary flashes of genuine emotion that cross person's face in a fraction of a second before the conscious mask reasserts itself. This phenomenon was first identified and documented by Dr. Paul Ekman, a psychologist at the University of California, San Francisco, whose decades of research form the basis of much of what we know about facial expression. Ekman identified 7 universal emotions: happiness, sadness, anger, fear, disgust, contempt, and surprise, each with its own consistent facial signature, expressed identically across cultures, from New York City to isolated villages in Papua New Guinea. Micro-expressions last between 1/15th and 1/25th of a second. They are nearly impossible to fake convincingly and nearly impossible to suppress entirely. This means that even the most poker-faced person in the room is briefly showing you everything, if you know how to look. But micro-expressions are just one channel of emotional leakage. The voice is another. Researchers at the University of Michigan found that people who are lying or suppressing strong emotions tend to speak in a slightly higher pitch than normal, use more hesitation sounds, and make more speech errors. The body is a third channel. Suppressed anxiety tends to manifest in repetitive self-touching, rubbing the neck, touching the face, fidgeting with jewelry. Genuine enthusiasm opens the body up. Wider gestures, forward lean, eye contact maintained rather than broken. Here is a practical observation that many experienced negotiators and therapists use. Watch for incongruence. When someone says, "I'm totally fine with that," while their jaw tightens and their smile does not reach their eyes, you are witnessing an emotional leak. The content of the words says one thing, the body says another. In that gap lives the truth. Develop the habit of paying more attention to the body than to the words when the two conflict. Consider a situation you have probably experienced. You ask someone how they are doing, and they say fine, but something in the weight of that single word, the slight downward inflection, the barely perceptible drop in the shoulders, tells you they are anything but. You felt it, even if you could not name it. That feeling was your own social intelligence processing the emotional leakage you observed, whether you were consciously aware of the observation or not. Your goal in developing this law is to sharpen that instinct into something more reliable and less dismissible. Start by observing people in low-stakes situations, conversations in cafes, interviews on television, meetings you are not directly involved in. Train yourself to notice the moment when the face and the words briefly out of alignment. With practice, this skill becomes automatic, a background hum of social awareness that informs every interaction without requiring conscious effort. Remember, you are not trying to catch people out. You are trying to understand them more fully. Emotional leakage often tells you things people cannot bring themselves to say directly, pain they are protecting, needs they are too proud to voice, fears they believe would make them vulnerable. Reading these signals with compassion, not suspicion, is the hallmark of genuine social intelligence. Law 3. People reveal themselves in what they repeat. If you want to understand someone deeply, stop paying so much attention to what they do once and start paying attention to what they do consistently. A single behavior can mean anything. A repeated behavior is a confession. This principle sits at the heart of behavioral psychology, BF. Skinner's foundational research on operant conditioning established that repeated behaviors are reinforced behaviors, meaning that if someone keeps doing something, at some level, it is working for them. It is meeting a need, resolving a discomfort, or providing a reward, even if that reward is invisible to the outside observer, and even if the behavior appears self-destructive from the outside. Think about the colleague who consistently arrives at meetings slightly late, once or twice, and you assume traffic, a difficult phone call, an unavoidable overlap. But consistently, every time, without fail, that pattern is telling you something. Maybe they are communicating their status. Their time is precious, and you will wait for it. Maybe they are conflict avoidant and use a late entrance as a way to bypass the awkward pre-meeting small talk. Maybe they are simply disorganized. The specific meaning requires more context to interpret, but the pattern itself demands your attention. Repetitive behaviors in conversation are equally revealing. Notice what topics someone keeps returning to, even in conversations where those topics are not obviously relevant. The person who consistently brings money into discussions, valuing things, calculating costs, mentioning their own financial achievements, is broadcasting their dominant concern. regardless of whether they realize it. The person who repeatedly steers conversation back to their past accomplishments is telling you where their self-worth lives. Narrative patterns are particularly rich. Researchers studying personal storytelling, the stories people choose to tell about their own lives, have found that these narratives are profoundly self-defining. A 2013 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that the redemptive or contaminating arc of a person's personal story predicted their psychological well-being, civic engagement, and generativity more accurately than traditional personality measures. In other words, the kind of story someone tells about themselves is who they are. Listen for repetition in the emotional register of someone's stories. Does every story about their past feature them as the victim of others' bad choices? Does every professional anecdote position them as the smartest person in the room? Are their relationship stories always about how others failed to appreciate them? These patterns are not random. They are the narrative fingerprints of a particular psychological organization. The practical takeaway is straightforward. Do not judge from single data points. Build your understanding of someone from the accumulating evidence of their repeated choices, themes, and stories. Give people time to show you who they are, and then, crucially, believe them. As the writer Maya Angelou famously observed, when someone shows you who they are the first time, believe them. But what she was really talking about was the pattern, not the incident. In your own life, this law offers an equally powerful mirror. What behaviors do you repeat? What themes run through your own stories? The patterns you see in others are also available to you in yourself, and self-knowledge is always the foundation of genuine social intelligence. Law 4. Everyone has a dominant need. Behind every human action, every choice, every reaction, sits a hierarchy of needs, and somewhere near the top of each person's unique hierarchy is a dominant need that shapes virtually everything they do. Find it, and you have found the key to understanding someone at a depth that most people never reach. Abraham Maslow's famous hierarchy of needs, introduced in his 1943 paper, A Theory of Human Motivation, remains one of psychology's most enduring frameworks. His pyramid moved from physiological survival at the base through safety, love and belonging, esteem and self-actualization at the apex. But for our purposes as social readers, the more useful insight is not the hierarchy itself, but the individuality of its expression. Different people, even at similar economic and social levels, are powerfully driven by different tiers of the pyramid at any given time. In practical terms, most people operate from one of four primary dominant needs: the need for approval, to be liked, accepted, and validated; the need for control, to have predictability, authority, and order; the need for security, to be safe, stable, and protected from loss; and the need for significance, to matter, to stand out, to be recognized as special or important. Someone whose dominant need is approval will structure much of their social behavior around maintaining relationships and avoiding conflict. They will be agreeable in groups, reluctant to deliver bad news, and vulnerable to flattery. They will often say yes when they mean no, and they will be deeply hurt by criticism, even when it is constructive and kindly delivered. Someone whose dominant need is control will be uncomfortable with ambiguity, resistant to having their decisions second-guessed, and often visibly tense in situations where outcomes are uncertain. They can be exceptional planners and organizers, but in close relationships, their need for control can read as suffocating or domineering. Security-dominant people are risk-averse by nature. They will tend toward caution, loyalty, and consistency. They build the same kind of routines and relationships that make them feel safe, and they resist change even when change might benefit them, because the familiar, even if imperfect, feels safer than the unknown. Significance-dominant people are driven by a need to be recognized, to stand out, to have their uniqueness acknowledged. They can be magnetic, ambitious, and creative. But when their need for significance is threatened, they may become competitive, dismissive of others, or susceptible to the thrill of status symbols and public recognition. Identifying someone's dominant need is not about labeling them or putting them in a box. It is about understanding the lens through which they interpret the world, and using that understanding to communicate more effectively, resolve conflict more gracefully, and build relationships that actually work for both people. The most powerful thing you can do with this knowledge is not leverage it for advantage, but use it to show up for people in the way they actually need, rather than the way that is most convenient for you. Law 5. Fear shapes more behavior than desire. Here is something your high school economics teacher probably did not tell you. Human beings are not primarily motivated by the pursuit of gain. We are primarily motivated by the avoidance of loss. This is not a cynical observation. It is one of the most robust findings in all of behavioral economics, and understanding it will transform the way you read people. In the 1970s and 1980s, psychologists Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky conducted a series of landmark experiments that gave rise to what they called prospect theory. Their central finding, for which Kahneman would later win the Nobel Prize in economics, was that losses feel psychologically approximately twice as powerful as equivalent gains. In other words, losing $100 hurts roughly twice as much as finding $100 feels good. This asymmetry is not a quirk. It is a fundamental feature of human psychology present across cultures and demographics. What this means for reading people is profound. When you want to understand why someone is doing something, particularly when that behavior seems puzzling, irrational, or self-defeating, ask not, what are they trying to gain, but what are they afraid of losing? The answers will often be far more illuminating. The executive who micromanages their team is not primarily trying to achieve excellence. They are trying to avoid the loss of control that comes with delegating. The person who stays in a mediocre relationship long past its expiry date is not failing to pursue happiness. They are trying to avoid the losses of companionship, of familiarity, of identity that come with leaving. The colleague who never volunteers for new projects is not lazy. They are protecting themselves from the potential loss of status that comes with trying and failing publicly. Once you can identify what someone is afraid of losing, their reputation, their autonomy, their relationships, their self-image, their sense of being a good person, you hold one of the most powerful keys to understanding their behavior. This insight also carries ethical weight. When you know someone's fears, you have the power to either exploit them or to gently address them. And these two options lead to entirely different kinds of relationships. Fear also shapes the stories we tell ourselves. Cognitive behavioral therapy, one of the most evidence-supported forms of psychological treatment in the world, is built on the insight that much of human suffering arises not from reality itself, but from the fearful interpretations we impose on reality. Learning to recognize when your own behavior is driven by fear rather than by genuine desire or values is one of the most liberating applications of this law to your own life. The next time you find yourself confused by why someone is doing what they are doing, slow down and ask the fear question: what loss might this behavior be designed to prevent? The answer will not always be comforting, but it will almost always be true. Law 6. The ego is always listening. Every conversation you have is really 3 conversations happening simultaneously. There is the content, the actual information being exchanged. There is the relationship, the ongoing negotiation of closeness, trust, and power between 2 people. And then there is the ego channel, running constantly beneath both of the others, monitoring everything for implications about the person's worth and self-image. The ego is not what Freud originally described. The scientific meaning has evolved considerably. In contemporary usage, when we talk about ego in social contexts, we are talking about the self-concept. The story a person holds about who they are, how they rank, and what they deserve. And this self-concept, it turns out, is extraordinarily vigilant and extraordinarily fragile in most people. Social psychologist Roy Baumeister and his colleagues at Florida State University have spent decades studying self-esteem and ego threat, and their findings are instructive. When people's self-concept is challenged, when they receive feedback that contradicts their self-image, when they are publicly embarrassed, when their competence or status is questioned, they respond with a predictable array of defensive maneuvers: denial, rationalization, aggression, or withdrawal, depending on personality and context. What this means practically is that the way you communicate information to someone matters at least as much as the information itself. You can be completely right and completely unsuccessful at the same time, simply because the manner of your delivery triggered someone's ego defenses. Once those defenses are up, very little of what you say will get through. The best communicators and leaders know this intuitively. They lead with affirmation before criticism. They frame challenges as opportunities rather than failures. They attribute successes generously and accept ownership of failures in ways that protect the self-concept of those around them. This is not flattery or manipulation. It is social intelligence applied to the reality of how human beings actually process information. Learning to read the ego channel means noticing when a conversation has shifted from content to self-concept. You will see it in the sudden defensiveness, the topic change, the slightly elevated voice, the joke at someone else's expense. You will feel it in the way the energy in the room changes when a particular subject is introduced. These are the moments to tread carefully, to listen more than you speak, and to remember that underneath almost every defensive reaction is a person trying to protect a version of themselves they are not yet ready to revise. Approach every human ego, including your own, with patience and compassion. The ego is not the enemy of good relationships. It is the guardian of the vulnerable self. Learn to work with it, and you will unlock levels of communication and connection that most people never reach. Part 2. The Art of Observation, Seeing What Others Miss. The foundation is set. Now we build the skill of observation, learning to gather information from the world around you with a level of precision and nuance that most people never develop. Law 7. Read the room before reading the person. Before you can accurately read any individual, you must first read the environment they are in. Context is not just relevant, it is everything. The same person will behave in dramatically different ways depending on the social setting, the power dynamics in the room, the cultural norms of the group, and the specific role they are being asked to play in that moment. Reading someone without reading their context is like judging a fish by its ability to climb a tree. Social psychologists call this the fundamental attribution error. The universal human tendency to overestimate the role of personality in explaining behavior while underestimating the role of situational factors. Stanford psychologist Lee Ross coined the term in 1977, and it has been one of the most reliably replicated findings in social psychology ever since. We watch someone act rudely at a party and conclude they are a rude person, when in fact they might be dealing with terrible news, severe anxiety in social settings, or cultural norms around directness that differ from our own. Rovan reading is a skill developed through conscious attention. When you enter any social environment, spend the first few minutes simply observing before participating. Notice who holds the floor and who yields it. Notice which topics energize the group and which create visible discomfort. Notice the physical positioning of people, who is close to whom, who has their back to whom, who keeps finding reasons to move toward or away from specific individuals. These patterns are the social architecture of the room, and they tell you an enormous amount before a single word is directed at you. Pay particular attention to the unspoken rules. Every group, every family, every team, every social circle has a set of rules about what is acceptable to say, do, and feel in that context. These rules are almost never written down or explicitly stated. They are communicated through the reactions of the group to the moments when someone inadvertently breaks them. The sudden silence, the exchanged glance, the barely perceptible stiffening. Learn to notice these moments, and you will quickly map the invisible boundaries of any social world. Caxalt reading also applies to time. The same conversation that would go beautifully on a relaxed Friday afternoon might detonate dangerously on a tense Monday morning before a major deadline. The most socially intelligent people I have ever observed are not necessarily those with the best things to say. They are the ones who have an uncanny sense of when to say them. Develop the habit of arriving early to important social situations. The 5 minutes before a meeting begins, before guests arrive, before a negotiation starts, are some of the richest minutes for room reading. In those moments, before people have switched fully into their public performance mode, you can gather more reliable information about the true emotional temperature of the room than in the structured interaction that follows. Once you have read the room, your reading of the individual people within it becomes exponentially more accurate. You have the context. Now you can see who is behaving in accordance with it and who is straining against it, and that contrast, more often than not, is where the most important social information lives. Law 8. The eyes never lie. Of all the channels through which human beings communicate, the eyes may be the most ancient and the most honest. Long before our species developed language, survival depended on reading the gaze of other creatures, friend or threat, hunter or prey, present or absent in mind. That evolutionary heritage means that our eyes carry more unfiltered emotional signal than almost any other part of the body. And it means we are exquisitely attuned to reading them in others, whether we know it or not. The science of eye behavior is remarkably rich. Pupil dilation, the expansion of the dark center of the eye, is an involuntary response controlled by the autonomic nervous system, the same system that governs the fight-or-flight response. Pupils dilate in response to genuine interest, attraction, and excitement. They constrict in response to dislike, disgust, and displeasure. Research by psychologist Eckhart Hess at the University of Chicago in the 1960s demonstrated that people shown identical photographs, but with digitally altered pupil sizes, consistently rated the figures with larger pupils as more attractive and more trustworthy, without being able to identify why. Eye contact itself is a profoundly loaded social signal. The appropriate amount varies enormously across cultures. In many Western cultures, sustained eye contact signals engagement and confidence, while breaking it too frequently reads as evasion or nervousness. But in many East Asian and indigenous cultures, Prolonged eye contact can be read as aggressive or disrespectful, while looking away is a sign of deference and respect. Context, as always, matters enormously. What is more culturally universal is the quality of eye contact rather than its duration. There is a world of difference between the fixed, unblinking stare of someone performing confidence and the warm, present, appropriately varied gaze of someone genuinely engaged with you. The latter involves small, natural movements, brief glances away in thought, returns to eye contact when making a point, the subtle softening around the eyes, what psychologists call the Duchenne marker, that accompanies genuine positive emotion. Direct of gaze in moments of thought is another productive signal, though one that requires significant caution. Popularized by neuro-linguistic programming in the 1970s, the idea that eye direction reliably indicates whether someone is accessing memory or imagination, the famous eye-accessing cues, has not held up well in rigorous scientific testing. A major 2012 study published in PLOS ONE tested the theory across multiple populations and found no reliable correlation. Be skeptical of any system that claims a single eye movement definitively means something specific. What the eyes do reliably reveal is attention and emotion. Where someone's gaze goes tells you what they are genuinely interested in. The person who keeps glancing at the door is not fully present with you. The person whose eyes light up when a particular topic is raised has just shown you something they care about. These are not interpretations, they are observations. Build your reading of people from observations first, interpretations second. Law 9. The body speaks before the mouth does. Before the first word of any conversation is spoken, a negotiation has already begun. It happens in the bodies of the people involved, in their posture, their physical orientation, the space they claim or surrender, the way they hold their arms and legs, and dozens of other silent signals that the human nervous system has been broadcasting and receiving for millions of years. Amy Cuddy's research at Harvard Business School on power poses, high-power expansive postures versus low-power contractive ones, sparked a massive public conversation when she presented it at TED in 2012, making it one of the most watched TED Talks of all time. While some aspects of her hormonal findings have been disputed in subsequent replication studies, the core behavioral finding has proven robust. People in expansive postures are perceived as more powerful and confident, and they tend to behave more powerfully and confidently as a result. The body's orientation toward another person is one of the most reliable signals of genuine interest or disinterest. When someone turns their torso, feet, and face all toward you, they are psychologically present with you. When the torso faces you but the feet point toward the door, the body is telling you something the polite words may not. Part of this person has already left the conversation. Feet are particularly honest signals. They are the part of the body we are least conscious of managing, and they tend to point in the direction we genuinely want to go. Arm positioning tells its own story. Crossed arms are not always defensive. Sometimes people cross their arms because they are cold, or because it is simply a comfortable resting position. But combined with other signals, increased physical distance, reduced eye contact, a tightening of the facial expression, crossed arms as part of a cluster do tend to indicate emotional withdrawal or defensiveness. Mirroring, the unconscious tendency to adopt the posture and gestures of the person we are interacting with, is one of the most powerful signals of rapport and connection. Mirror neurons, first identified in macaque monkeys in the 1990s and subsequently studied extensively in humans, underpin a neural system that automatically maps the actions and emotional states of others onto our own bodies. When you genuinely like and feel connected to someone, you naturally begin to mirror their physical behavior. Skilled communicators sometimes consciously use this, subtly matching the body language of a person they want to build rapport with, though conscious mirroring must be extremely subtle to avoid coming across as mockery. The practice here is to widen your perceptual field. Most of us listen to people from the neck up, focusing almost exclusively on their face and words. Begin listening from the neck down. Let your awareness expand to include the whole person, their entire physical presence, their relationship to the space around them. The story their body is telling, alongside the story their words are telling. Law 10. Listen to the silences. In music, the notes are only half the story. The silences between the notes, the rests, the pauses, the gaps, give the music its shape, its tension, its meaning. Conversation works the same way. What people do not say, the topics they deflect, the questions they answer with questions, the moments when they go quiet where you expected words, these silences are among the most information-rich moments in any human interaction. Silence in conversation carries several distinct flavors, each with its own meaning. There is the comfortable silence between people who trust each other deeply, a silence that does not need to be filled because the relationship itself fills it. There is the thoughtful silence that indicates genuine engagement and reflection, a sign often that you have said something that actually landed. And then there is the tense, loaded silence of the unsaid, the words that are present but not spoken, hovering in the air between two people like a held breath. Experienced therapists learn to read silences as carefully as speech. When a patient goes quiet in the middle of a topic, that silence is not a break in the conversation. It is the most important moment in it. The topic that produced the silence is, almost always, exactly the territory that most needs to be explored. In ordinary social and professional life, pay attention to the topics that people consistently avoid. In negotiations, what does the other party never bring up directly, always circling around? In close relationships, what subjects seem to require a particular kind of delicate navigation? In team meetings, what issues get raised in the hallway afterward, but never at the table? These consistent silences are the map of the territory that matters most. There is also the silence of the non-response. The text that was never replied to, the email that was read but not answered, the question that was heard but somehow never quite addressed. These silences are forms of communication, even if they are not technically speech. They are, in fact, among the most unambiguous messages people send. This topic, this question, this person, is one I am not ready or willing to engage with directly. Developing your sensitivity to silence requires a willingness to sit with discomfort. Our culture is deeply uncomfortable with silence, and we tend to fill it reflexively with noise, words, jokes, questions, offers of food, anything to break the tension. Resist this impulse. When a silence opens up in an important conversation, let it breathe. You will be amazed at what often emerges when people are not rescued from the pause. Law 11. Voice tells the truth, the words will not. Humans are, among other things, instrument-quality sound machines. The human voice is capable of conveying enormous amounts of emotional information through pitch, pace, volume, rhythm, and tone, and we are extraordinarily sensitive to all of these dimensions, even when we are not consciously processing them. You can often tell within the first few seconds of a phone call whether the person on the other end is in a good mood, stressed, frightened, or angry, long before the content of what they are saying has had a chance to reach your conscious understanding. Research in the psychology of voice has produced some striking findings. A 2014 study published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology found that people are able to judge another person's personality and socioeconomic status more accurately from their voice alone than from their physical appearance. The voice carries information about education level, emotional stability, introversion and extroversion, and openness to experience with remarkable reliability. Pitch is one of the most revealing vocal dimensions. When people are under stress, the laryngeal muscles tighten, raising the fundamental frequency of the voice. This is why your voice gets slightly higher when you are nervous, lying, or experiencing strong emotion. Trained investigators and experienced interviewers often report noticing pitch changes in subjects discussing sensitive topics, even in the absence of other stress signals. Speech rate is another rich signal. People typically speak faster when excited, anxious, or enthusiastic, and slower when sad, thoughtful, or choosing their words with unusual care. A sudden slowing in someone's speech about a topic that they have previously discussed fluently is a signal worth noting. Something has changed in their emotional relationship to this territory. The quality of resonance in the voice tells you something about the person's level of presence and groundedness. A voice that resonates from the chest, full, warm, unhurried, tends to belong to someone who is physically relaxed and emotionally present. A voice that sits in the throat, thin, slightly strained, disconnected from the body's natural resonance, tends to indicate tension or emotional suppression. What is perhaps most important is the habit of listening to how something is said rather than exclusively to what is said. The emotional undertone of someone's communication, that ineffable quality that makes you feel warmly invited into a story versus coldly excluded from it, lives in the paralinguistic features of their voice. Learn to attend to that channel as carefully as you attend to the content, and you will find yourself understanding people in an entirely new dimension. Law 12. Watch how they treat those below them. There is a test for character that is older than psychology, older than philosophy, possibly as old as civilization itself. Watch how a powerful person treats those who cannot benefit them. The way someone treats a waiter, a janitor, a subordinate, a child, or a stranger asking for help is one of the most reliable windows into who they actually are, stripped of the performance they put on for those whose good opinion they are seeking. This principle has been observed and stated in various forms across cultures and centuries. What modern psychology has done is give us the research to explain why it works so reliably as a character indicator. The key is the absence of strategic incentive. When we interact with people who have power over our outcomes, bosses, clients, people we are trying to impress, most of us are motivated to present our best, most considerate, most socially polished selves. But when we interact with people whose good opinion carries no instrumental value for us, the performance drops and the real self emerges. A 2016 study from the University of Florida, published in the Journal of Applied Psychology, found that rude behavior towards service workers was a reliable predictor of workplace bullying. That people who treated those in subordinate positions disrespectfully were significantly more likely to engage in bullying behaviors with colleagues and direct reports. The behavior did not appear in isolation, it was part of a pattern. Pay attention to how someone responds when things go wrong in a service situation. A kitchen makes a mistake with someone's order. A taxi takes a slightly wrong turn. A subordinate misunderstands a task. In these moments, the person who remains patient, reasonable, and kind, who treats the error as an understandable human imperfection rather than an affront to their importance, is showing you something real. And the person who escalates, demeans, or punishes in these moments is showing you something equally real. I want to be careful here not to suggest that a single instance defines a person. Everyone has bad days. Everyone is occasionally ruder than they intend to be. What you are looking for is the pattern. Is this how they consistently behave when the social stakes are low? And you are looking for the emotional quality of the behavior. Is there genuine contempt or dismissiveness beneath it, or just a momentary frustration quickly corrected? This law is also a call to self-examination. We are all someone's boss, someone's more powerful neighbor, someone's wealthier acquaintance. The question of how we treat those who cannot immediately benefit us is a daily referendum on our actual values. Not the values we espouse, but the values we live. Law 13. Observe behavior under pressure. The American writer Ernest Hemingway defined courage as grace under pressure. Whether or not you agree with that specific definition, the principle that pressure reveals character is one of the most durable truths in all of psychology. Who someone is when things are easy tells you very little about who they truly are. Who someone is when things are hard, when they are under stress, when their interests are threatened, when they have failed or fear they are about to fail, is who they actually are. This is because psychological stress systematically dismantles the cognitive resources we use to manage our social performance. The prefrontal cortex, the brain's executive center, responsible for planning, self-regulation, and social calibration, is among the first regions to be compromised when the brain's threat detection systems are activated. Under significant stress, we become more reactive, less reflective, more likely to act on impulse, and less likely to act on principle. Research by social psychologist Roy Baumeister on what he termed ego depletion demonstrated that self-control functions like a muscle. It fatigues with use and is further degraded by stress. When people are under high pressure and their self-regulation resources are depleted, their behavior becomes less controlled and more revealing of their underlying traits and impulses. In practical terms, this means you should pay especially close attention to how people behave in moments of difficulty. How do they handle a professional setback? Do they take responsibility, or do they find external targets for blame? How do they behave in an argument or conflict? Do they fight to understand or fight to win? How do they respond when they are wrong? The answer to that last question is perhaps the most revealing of all. The capacity to be wrong with grace requires a level of ego security that is rarer than most people realize. If you are building a long-term professional partnership, a deep friendship, or a romantic relationship, do not commit to it until you have seen the other person under some meaningful degree of pressure. Shared adversity is one of the great accelerators of real knowledge. In many ways, a difficult hour together tells you more about a person than a year of smooth sailing. And of course, this law applies to you too. Notice who you become when the pressure is high. Notice the impulses that emerge, the instincts that surface, the parts of yourself that are harder to manage when resources are thin. That self-knowledge is not just socially useful. It is the foundation of genuine personal integrity. Law 14. The first reaction is the truest reaction. Before the social filter kicks in, before the mind has had a chance to calculate the appropriate response, before the persona reasserts itself, there is a brief moment of pure, unmanaged reaction. It might be a flash of expression, a sharp intake of breath, a single syllable, an involuntary step backward. It lasts less than a second. It is usually quickly covered over by something more considered and more socially appropriate. But that first reaction is almost always the truest one, and if you learn to catch it, you have a window into a person's real feelings that almost nothing else can provide. This principle has deep roots in social psychology. The concept of the affective primacy effect, first proposed by Robert Zajonc in the 1980s, describes the way emotional reactions to stimuli occur before and independently of cognitive evaluation. We feel before we think. The emotional brain processes incoming information faster than the cognitive brain. By some estimates, the amygdala's threat detection response fires up to 80,000 times faster than the prefrontal cortex's analytical response. In conversation, first reactions appear most clearly when you introduce unexpected information, make an unexpected request, or touch on a topic the person has strong but unacknowledged feelings about. Watch the face in the half-second before they begin their considered response. A flash of relief, of fear, of disgust, of contempt, of joy. These micro-expressions are the emotional truth of the moment. First reactions also appear in people's initial choice of words before they have had a chance to revise them. The first thing that comes out of someone's mouth when they hear surprising news, "That's wonderful," or "Oh no," or "Are you serious?" reflects their actual feeling far more accurately than the more measured, diplomatic response that typically follows. This law requires the cultivation of a particular kind of attention. Quick, peripheral, unobtrusive. You are not staring at people or hunting for gotcha moments. You are developing the habit of noticing the first beat of every response, that unguarded instant before the social performance resumes, and holding it gently in your memory as you interpret everything that follows. In your own life, pay attention to your first reactions too. Before your mind has told you what you are supposed to think or feel about something, what did you actually think and feel? That first flicker is honest information about your own values, desires, and fears, information that the cognitive mind often quickly buries under social expectation, habit, and the elaborate stories we tell ourselves about who we are. Part 3. The Psychology of Influence, the Inner Mechanics. Understanding how people think and feel is only half the equation. This section explores the invisible mechanisms by which minds are moved, and how to engage with them responsibly. Law 15. People decide emotionally, then justify logically. This is one of the most important and least comfortable truths in all of human psychology. We do not decide things with our rational minds and then feel good about the decision. We feel our way to a decision quickly, intuitively, emotionally, and then use our rational minds to construct a justification for what we have already decided. The reasoning comes after the conclusion. The logic serves the feeling. This is not a character flaw. It is the architecture of the brain. Neuroscientist Antonio Damasio's landmark research, described in his groundbreaking 1994 book, Descartes' Error, documented this process in extraordinary detail. Damasio studied patients with damage to the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the brain region that integrates emotion with decision-making. These patients retained their logical and analytical capabilities entirely, but lost their ability to experience emotional responses to outcomes. And the result was not that they became more rational decision-makers. They became incapable of making decisions at all. Without the emotional signal to guide the rational process, the mind is paralyzed in an infinite loop of equivalent options. What this means for reading people is that logical arguments, however brilliant and well constructed, will almost never change minds on their own. If someone's emotional conclusion is already in place, if they have already decided how they feel about something, no amount of rational argumentation will dislodge it without first addressing the emotional foundation. This is why great persuaders, the best lawyers, the most effective leaders, the most successful salespeople, lead with story and emotion before presenting evidence. They know, intuitively or explicitly, that the sequence of effective communication is make someone feel something first and then give them the reasoning to support what they already feel. Reversing that sequence, leading with the facts and hoping the emotion will follow, is the approach most of us were taught in school, and it is frequently ineffective. In your own interactions, when you need to change someone's mind, ask yourself first, what is the emotional reality of this person right now? What are they feeling about this topic? What emotional need would being convinced of your argument serve for them? And then lead with that, with empathy, with acknowledgement of their current emotional reality, with a story that connects your argument to something they already value or fear. The ethical note here is important. The fact that emotions drive decisions does not license emotional manipulation. There is an enormous difference between appealing to someone's genuine values and fears through honest communication and exploiting their emotional vulnerabilities to bypass their rational judgment. The former is just good communication. The latter is manipulation. The difference lies in whether the information you are providing is true and whether the conclusion you are leading them toward is actually in their interest. Law 16. Everyone wants to feel understood before they feel convinced. There is a step that most people skip in the process of persuasion, negotiation, and influence, and it is precisely the step that makes all the other steps work. That step is, before you try to change someone's mind, demonstrate that you genuinely understand it. This principle has its roots in Carl Rogers' person-centered psychotherapy, developed in the 1940s and 1950s. Rogers found that the most important healing factor in therapy was not the therapist's interpretations or advice, but the experience of being deeply heard and understood by another human being. He called this empathic understanding and described it as the prerequisite for genuine change in therapy and, he argued, in human relationships generally. Harvard Negotiation Project researchers Roger Fisher and William Ury, in their classic work, Getting to Yes, identified this same principle as central to effective negotiation. Before addressing positions, the stated demands and conditions of a negotiation, skilled negotiators first map and acknowledge the interests that underlie those positions. What does the other party actually need? What are they afraid of? What would make them feel safe enough to be flexible? The neurological basis for this is increasingly well understood. When people feel genuinely heard and understood, the threat detection systems of the brain downregulate. The fight-or-flight response diminishes, the prefrontal cortex re-engages, and the cognitive and emotional resources needed for genuine consideration of new information become available again. You cannot convince someone whose nervous system is in threat mode. Empathy creates the safety needed for openness. In practice, this means developing the skill of reflective listening, the ability to feed back to someone not just the content of what they have said, but the emotional reality beneath it. Not just, so you're saying the deadline is too tight, but it sounds like you're feeling pressured from both sides and worried that cutting corners to meet the deadline might damage work you're really proud of. The second response lands differently because it reaches further into the feeling beneath the fact. Try this in your next difficult conversation. Before making your case, spend 5 minutes genuinely mapping the other person's perspective, their concerns, their needs, their emotional reality. Then articulate it back to them, as accurately and empathically as you can, before you say a word about your own position. Notice what happens to the quality of the conversation. Notice what opens. Law 17. Scarcity creates value in minds and markets. The less available something is, the more we want it. This is not merely a marketing observation. It is a deeply embedded cognitive heuristic that evolution built into us for good reason. In environments of genuine scarcity, the ability to recognize and act quickly on rare opportunities was a survival advantage. The problem, in the modern world, is that this ancient software runs on circumstances that are often engineered rather than natural, and we are frequently manipulated by it without knowing. Robert Cialdini, the social psychologist whose 1984 book Influence became one of the most widely read works in social psychology, identified scarcity as one of the 6 core principles of persuasion. His research demonstrated that people assign more value to opportunities they perceive as less available, and that this effect is amplified when the scarcity results from competition. When others are also wanting the thing you want, the desirability of that thing increases sharply. In social dynamics, scarcity operates in subtler but equally powerful ways. People who seem genuinely hard to reach, whose time appears genuinely limited, whose approval is difficult to earn, are typically perceived as more valuable than those who are immediately, easily, consistently available. This is a dynamic you will recognize from romantic relationships, professional mentorships, and social hierarchies. The person who is consistently eager to please everyone pleases no one deeply. Understanding this principle in the behavior of others allows you to read certain social performances more accurately. The person who is slow to respond, who manufactures busyness, who creates artificial constraints around their availability, may not actually be as constrained as they appear. They may be consciously or unconsciously leveraging the scarcity principle to inflate their perceived value. The ethical application of this insight is not to artificially manufacture scarcity in your own interactions, that is manipulation, but to maintain genuine selectivity. Your time and attention are genuinely limited resources. Treating them as such, being genuinely thoughtful about where you invest them, is not a social game. It is an expression of real self-respect, and it will naturally produce the perception of value without the need for performance. Law 18. Social proof is the invisible hand. When we are uncertain about the right course of action, we look to others to guide us. This is social proof, one of the most powerful and most pervasive influences on human behavior, operating in virtually every social context. From what movies we watch, to what political positions we hold to, whether we leave a tip at a restaurant we have never visited before. Cialdini's research on social proof demonstrated that people are especially likely to look to others for behavioral guidance in 3 conditions: when they are uncertain, when the others they observe are similar to them, and when many others are doing the same thing. The combination of these 3 factors can produce extraordinary conformity effects. Solomon Asch's famous conformity experiments from the 1950s remain among the most powerful demonstrations of social proof in action. In these experiments, subjects were asked to judge the length of lines, a simple, objectively answerable question, in the presence of confederates who deliberately gave wrong answers. Across multiple iterations of the study, approximately 75% of subjects conformed to the group's wrong answer at least once, and about a third of all responses were conforming even when the correct answer was plainly obvious. In reading people, understanding social proof helps explain a wide range of otherwise puzzling behaviors. The person who adopts positions they have not thought through carefully, the crowd that laughs at something most of them do not find, the professional who endorses a decision they privately think is wrong, These are not examples of stupidity or cowardice. They are examples of the social proof heuristic operating as it was designed to. In uncertain or socially costly territory, look to others for guidance. The critical social intelligence skill here is developing the capacity to notice when you are relying on social proof rather than your own assessment. When you find yourself going along with a position because everyone else seems to hold it, pause and ask, what do I actually think, independent of what the group thinks? This kind of independent thinking is rare and is often what separates the most trusted people in any community from the rest. Law 19. Authority commands without asking. One of the most unsettling demonstrations in the history of psychology is Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments conducted at Yale in the early 1960s. Milgram, motivated in part by the question of how ordinary people could participate in the atrocities of the Holocaust, set up situations in which ordinary American citizens were instructed by an authority figure, a man in a white lab coat, to administer what appeared to be electric shocks of increasing intensity to a subject in another room. The results were shocking in every sense. Approximately 65% of participants administered what they believed were potentially lethal shocks, simply because the authority figure in the white coat instructed them to continue. Later replications and variations of the experiment, conducted across different cultures and demographics, consistently confirmed the basic finding: authority is one of the most powerful behavioral levers available to any human being, and it operates largely outside our conscious awareness. Authority is communicated through multiple channels: title, credentials, uniform, language, physical bearing, and the confidence with which someone occupies space. What makes authority particularly interesting from a social reading perspective is how easily it can be performed versus how rarely it is examined. We are conditioned from childhood to defer to authority, and this conditioning is so deeply embedded that many people will defer to performed authority even when there is no actual expertise or legitimacy behind it. Learning to distinguish genuine authority, backed by real knowledge, real experience, real accountability, from performed authority is one of the important meta-skills in this book. Genuine authority tends to be comfortable with questions and uncertainty, because it does not depend on the performance of certainty for its status. Performed authority tends to be brittle under examination, and often responds to challenge with displays of dominance rather than substance. In your own communication, genuine authority emerges not from claiming it, but from demonstrating it. Through the quality of your knowledge, the consistency of your judgment, and the reliability of your accountability. These qualities build real authority over time, and real authority, once established, requires no performance at all. Law 20. Reciprocity creates invisible debt. Give, and the social contract does the rest. Reciprocity, the deeply embedded human impulse to return gifts, favors and kindnesses with equivalent gifts, favors and kindnesses, is one of the foundational norms of virtually every human society that has ever been studied. Anthropologist Marcel Mauss, in his 1925 essay *The Gift*, argued that gift exchange was the bedrock of social organization, a system of mutual obligation that created the bonds of community and cooperation. Reciprocity's power as an influence principle lies in its nearly involuntary nature. When someone does something for us, even something uninvited, even something we did not particularly want, we experience a psychological pressure to return the favor that can be remarkably difficult to resist. Cialdini documented this extensively in his research, describing how the reciprocity norm could be activated even by small, trivial gifts. In one memorable study, a small candy given with a restaurant bill increased tips by 14% compared to no candy. The invisible nature of reciprocal debt is both its power and its danger. Because the obligation is felt as a matter of personal integrity, we are good people, and good people repay what they owe. It can be exploited by those who understand it. The salesperson who brings you an uninvited gift before making their pitch. The colleague who does you a small unsolicited favor before asking a large one. The politician who provides constituent services in exchange for votes. All are activating the reciprocity norm with varying degrees of conscious intent. Reading reciprocity in social dynamics means noticing who gives and who receives, in what proportions and what forms of repayment are expected. Relationships where giving and receiving are chronically one-sided are relationships in trouble. Healthy relationships involve a flexible, long-term balance of mutual generosity, not a transactional ledger of exact equivalence, but a general current of mutual care that flows in both directions. Practice genuine, unconditional generosity, giving without an explicit expectation of return, and you will find that reciprocity works in your favor naturally, without manipulation. The most generous people in any social network are typically also the most trusted and the most supported. Not because they calculated it that way, but because human beings naturally want to care for those who have cared for them. Part 4. Reading different personality archetypes. People are infinitely varied, but they tend to organize around recognizable psychological patterns. Understanding these archetypes gives you a framework for faster, more accurate reading. Law 21. Know the strategist. The strategist is the person who is always thinking 3 moves ahead. In every conversation, they are not only listening to what you say, but calculating how it fits into a larger plan. They are the ones who ask questions that seem slightly off topic, who remember small details you mentioned months ago, who seem to know what you are going to say before you say it. At their best, strategists are visionary leaders, master negotiators, and brilliant problem solvers. At their worst, they are manipulative, secretive, and impossible to fully trust, because you never know when you are being played rather than simply spoken to. The defining feature of the strategist is future orientation combined with hidden intentionality. They do not do things simply because they feel like it. They do things because those actions serve a purpose in a larger architecture of goals. Psychologists studying trait conscientiousness and executive function have found that individuals high in strategic thinking tend to score exceptionally well on tests of delay of gratification and long-term planning. But the same cognitive machinery that allows them to build empires can also allow them to treat people as pieces on a chessboard. You recognize the strategist by several patterns. They rarely give direct answers to direct questions, preferring to answer with another question or a redirection. They are masters of the meaningful pause and the carefully timed reveal. They keep their own counsel about their true intentions, often sharing only what is necessary to get what they want from you. And they have an uncanny ability to show up, seemingly by accident, exactly when and where they are most needed. Navigating strategists requires a particular kind of respect. They are not moved by emotional appeals or guilt trips. They are moved by alignment of interests. The most effective way to build trust with a strategist is to be transparent about your own interests while demonstrating that you understand theirs. Show them that you are also thinking ahead, that you see the larger game, and that cooperation serves both of you better than manipulation. And always keep a small part of your own counsel. The strategist respects those who cannot be fully read. Law 22. Know the avoider. The avoider is the person who never seems to be fully present for difficult conversations, hard decisions, or moments of emotional intensity. They change the subject when things get real. They suddenly remember an appointment when conflict looms. They answer a direct question about a sensitive topic with a joke, a vague statement, or a retreat into generalities. At their best, avoiders create peaceful, low-drama environments and are masters of keeping the group calm. At their worst, they leave problems unaddressed until they fester, betray confidences by refusing to take sides, and make you feel profoundly alone in moments when you most needed someone to stand with you. The psychological core of the avoider is intolerance for emotional discomfort. Research in attachment theory, particularly the work of Mary Main on dismissing attachment strategies, shows that some individuals learn early in life that the safest response to emotional intensity is to mentally and physically withdraw. This is not laziness or cowardice in the usual sense. It is a learned survival strategy that once protected them from environments where emotional engagement was dangerous. But in adult relationships, it becomes a form of abandonment. You recognize the avoider by what they do not do. They do not initiate difficult conversations. They do not return emotional bids from partners or friends. When you raise a concern, they listen with a flat, distant expression and then say something like, "Let's talk about this later." But later never comes. They are consistently absent from the moments that require courage, and consistently present for the moments that require nothing more than pleasant surface engagement. Dealing with avoiders effectively requires adjusting your expectations. You cannot force an avoider into emotional presence by demanding it. That will only trigger more avoidance. Instead, give them advance notice before important conversations, allowing them time to prepare mentally. Frame difficult topics as problems to be solved together rather than emotional confrontations. And be honest with yourself about the cost of a relationship with someone who will not meet you in the hard moments. Some avoiders can learn to be braver if you create enough safety. Some cannot. Knowing the difference is an act of self-protection. Law 23. Know the controller. The controller is one of the most common and one of the most challenging archetypes you will encounter in professional and personal life. At their best, controllers are decisive, organized, reliable, and highly capable of getting things done. At their worst, they are domineering, inflexible, suffocating in close relationships, and capable of deeply damaging the morale and autonomy of those around them. The defining psychological feature of the controller is a deep discomfort with uncertainty and a corresponding compulsion to impose predictability on their environment, including, and especially, other people. Research in personality psychology consistently links high control orientation with the broader trait cluster of conscientiousness and, in more extreme expressions, with obsessive-compulsive personality features. A 2019 meta-analysis in the journal Psychological Bulletin found that high conscientiousness is among the most reliably positive predictors of professional performance, but that its extreme expression correlates with relational difficulties and emotional rigidity. You recognize the controller in several characteristic patterns. They have opinions about how things should be done, not just their own things, but yours. They struggle to delegate, preferring to do things themselves rather than risk the anxiety of uncertain outcomes. When plans change unexpectedly, they react with a level of distress that seems disproportionate to the actual stakes. They keep mental scores and can recall, with remarkable precision, who did what and when, and whether it met their standards. Navigating controllers effectively requires understanding that their behavior is driven not by malice but by fear. Specifically, the fear of chaos, failure, and the loss of the order that makes them feel safe. Directly challenging their control tends to escalate their anxiety and therefore their controlling behavior. More effective is giving them visibility and predictability. Keep them informed, honor your commitments, be explicit about timelines and processes. When a controller knows what to expect, they can usually relax their grip. The most important thing to protect in any relationship with a strong controller is your own autonomy. Without firm, consistent boundary setting, controllers will naturally expand their territory of influence into every available space. This is not vindictive. It is simply how their psychology works. Your job is not to fight their nature, but to maintain clear, respectful limits that preserve your own sense of self and freedom. Law 24. Know the pleaser. The pleaser is the person in every room who seems to have no opinions of their own, or rather, has opinions carefully shaped to match what the most important person present seems to want. They agree before you have finished your sentence. They say yes when they mean no. Their warmth and enthusiasm seem total. And yet you sometimes leave interactions with feeling oddly less known than when you arrived. Pleasers are not simply nice people. Pleasers are people whose fundamental need for approval has become the organizing principle of their social identity. Their behavior is driven by an often unconscious equation. If I make everyone happy, I will be safe. This equation typically has its roots in early experiences in which approval was conditional or inconsistent, and in which conflict or disagreement was genuinely dangerous. What began as an adaptive survival strategy has become, in adulthood, a rigid interpersonal pattern. Psychotherapist and author Harriet Lerner, in her extensive work on people-pleasing and self-silencing, describes the cost of this pattern with particular clarity. The pleaser gradually loses access to their own authentic voice. Habitual agreement, habitual suppression of needs and opinions, habitual prioritization of others' comfort over their own truth. These practices, over time, produce a person who genuinely does not know what they want or need, because they have spent so long not asking. Reading pleasers accurately requires looking beneath the surface of their agreement. When a pleaser tells you something is fine, press gently, not intrusively, but with genuine curiosity. Ask open questions. Create space for disagreement by modeling it yourself. Share your own doubts. Acknowledge the complexity of decisions. Invite their true perspective explicitly. Pleasers often have rich, genuine views that they have simply never felt safe enough to express. The ethical dimension here is important. Pleasers are vulnerable to exploitation precisely because their need to avoid conflict makes them unlikely to defend their own interests. In professional contexts, they take on excessive workloads without complaint. In personal relationships, they sacrifice their own needs indefinitely. If you are a natural leader or dominant personality, the ethical obligation with pleasers in your life is to actively create conditions in which their genuine voice can emerge, to reward honesty rather than agreement, and to make it genuinely safe to say no. Law 25. Know the victim. The victim archetype is perhaps the most painful to engage with, because it involves a person who has found, whether consciously or not, that the performance of suffering and helplessness is an effective strategy for getting their needs met. The victim is not necessarily someone who has not experienced genuine hardship. Often they have. But something happened, somewhere in their development, that converted genuine pain into a permanent social role. Psychologist Stephen Karpman's drama triangle, developed in the 1960s, describes a dynamic that plays out in many dysfunctional relationships involving three roles: victim, persecutor, and rescuer. The victim elicits rescue by presenting as helpless and overwhelmed. The rescuer is drawn in by genuine care and the satisfying feeling of being needed. The persecutor, sometimes a real person, sometimes an external circumstance, provides the threat that justifies the victim's position. The roles can cycle and reverse, but the triangle itself persists because all three positions, in their way, meet psychological needs. Identifying the victim pattern in someone you care about requires careful observation. Victims typically have a story about why external circumstances are responsible for their situation, a tendency to reject practical solutions to problems, while dwelling on the unfairness of their predicament, and a pattern of relationships in which they repeatedly attract people who want to help them, and then feel let down by those people when the help does not produce lasting change. The most important thing to understand about the victim pattern is that it is maintained because it works, not because the person is choosing to manipulate you consciously, but because helplessness has become a strategy that provides connection, attention, and relief from personal responsibility. The most compassionate response is to offer genuine support while refusing to enable the helplessness, to see the person's capacity for agency even when they cannot see it themselves, and to gently but consistently hold that vision in your interactions with them. Law 26. Know the charismatic. The charismatic is the person who walks into a room and the energy shifts. People lean in when they speak. Their laugh seems to invite others to laugh along. Their attention, when they give it, feels like a gift. At their best, charismatics are inspiring leaders, beloved friends, and the glue that holds communities together. At their worst, they are superficial, unreliable, and impossible to truly know because their warmth is spread so thin across so many people that no one gets the full depth of who they really are. Charisma is not magic. It is a set of observable behaviors that can be studied. Researchers in social psychology, including John Antonakis at the University of Lausanne, have identified the core components of charismatic communication: vivid and imaginative language, moral conviction expressed with emotional intensity, nonverbal expressiveness, animated face, varied voice, open body language, and the ability to create a sense of shared mission. Charismatic people do these things naturally or through practice, and the result is that others feel more alive, more hopeful, and more connected in their presence. You recognize the charismatic by the way they make you feel, but also by the subtle signs of their pattern. They remember names effortlessly and use them often. They give you the gift of their full attention, but only for a limited time before they move on to the next person. They tell stories that make you feel like you are the hero, even when the story is about them. And they are almost never alone, because people are drawn to their warmth like moths to a flame. The challenge with charismatics is that their gift is also their limitation. The same emotional expressiveness that makes them magnetic can make them unreliable in moments that require quiet, steady, unglamorous presence. The charismatic who sweeps you off your feet in a romance may disappear when the relationship enters the difficult middle ground of daily maintenance. The charismatic leader who inspires a team may struggle with the boring work of follow-through. To relate well to charismatics, enjoy their warmth without assuming it means special commitment to you. Appreciate their gifts while keeping your expectations realistic. And if you are a charismatic yourself, the work is to learn the virtues you are not naturally drawn to: consistency, follow-through, the kind of love that shows up on a Tuesday afternoon when nothing exciting is happening. Law 27. Know the martyr. The martyr is the person who is always sacrificing, always giving, always doing more than anyone else, and always making sure you know it. Their generosity comes with a price tag, even if that price is only the subtle burden of your guilt. At their best, martyrs are genuinely selfless caregivers who have simply never learned to ask for what they need directly. At their worst, they are emotional accountants who keep a ledger of every gift given and every slight suffered, and who weaponize their own suffering to control those around them. The psychological dynamic of the martyr was explored in depth by psychotherapist Claude Steiner in his work on emotional literacy. Steiner described the martyr as someone who has learned that direct requests for love, attention, or help are dangerous, perhaps because they were punished or shamed for expressing needs in childhood. The solution is to give excessively, then broadcast the suffering that giving causes, in the hope that others will notice and offer the care that cannot be asked for directly. The tragedy is that this strategy almost never works. Instead of receiving genuine care, the martyr receives resentment and exhaustion from those around them. You recognize the martyr by the sigh. The sigh when they do a chore no one asked them to do. The sigh when they stay late at work while everyone else goes home. The sigh when they mention in passing that they haven't had a day off in 3 weeks. Their speech is full of phrases like, "I guess I'll just do it myself," and "No, don't worry about me, I'm fine," delivered in a tone that makes it clear they are not fine. They resist offers of help while simultaneously resenting the lack of help. The most important thing to understand about the martyr is that you cannot save them by giving more. Because the problem is not the absence of help, it is their inability to receive it. If you jump in to rescue every time they sigh, you will exhaust yourself and they will still feel unappreciated. The compassionate response is to name the pattern gently, offer help once, and then let them be responsible for accepting it or not. And if the martyr is you, the work is to learn the terrifying act of asking directly for what you need, without the performance of suffering that makes genuine connection so difficult. Law 28. Know the competitor. The competitor is the person for whom every interaction is a contest. There is a winner and a loser in every conversation, every collaboration, every relationship. If you share a success, they will immediately share a greater success. If you express a difficulty, they will recount a worse difficulty. If you propose an idea, they will offer a better one. At their best, competitors drive excellence, push teams to higher performance, and achieve extraordinary things because they simply cannot stand to lose. At their worst, they are exhausting to be around, incapable of genuine celebration of others, and prone to sabotaging potential collaborators because they cannot bear to share credit. The psychological engine of the competitor is what social psychologists call social comparison orientation, the tendency to evaluate oneself constantly against others. Researchers including Leon Festinger, who developed social comparison theory in the 1950s, found that this drive is universal but varies enormously in intensity. For high-intensity competitors, the self is not defined internally but exists only in relation to others. If someone else is winning, the competitor is losing, even if the contest is entirely in their own mind. You recognize the competitor by the way they respond to good news. When you tell them about a promotion, they smile briefly and then say, "That's great. I remember when I made senior director at 28. When you share a personal achievement, they immediately pivot to their own. Watch their behavior in group settings. They will find ways to subtly undermine others' contributions, to claim more credit than is due, to turn collaborative efforts into individual showcases. And notice their reaction when someone else is publicly praised. The stiffness in their smile, the quick subject change, the compliment that feels slightly backhanded. Navigating competitors requires strategic boundary setting. Do not share your vulnerabilities with them expecting empathy. They will see them as weaknesses to be exploited. Do not expect them to celebrate you without a competitive countermove. Instead, frame collaboration in terms of mutual benefit. Acknowledge their competitive drive openly. I know you like to win, and here's how we both can, and limit your emotional investment in their validation. And if you are a competitor yourself, the growth edge is learning to let others win sometimes, to celebrate genuinely, to discover that your worth does not depend on being ahead of everyone else. Law 29. Know the idealist. The idealist is the person who sees the world not as it is, but as it should be. They speak in absolutes, always, never, everyone, no one. They are drawn to grand visions, noble causes, and the promise of transformation. At their best, idealists are the moral compass of any group, the ones who remind everyone of higher values when pragmatism threatens to become cynicism. At their worst, they are rigid, judgmental, impossible to please, and prone to disillusionment when reality inevitably fails to match their beautiful mental models. The idealist's psychology is shaped by what developmental psychologists call post-conventional moral reasoning. Lawrence Kohlberg's stages of moral development describe how some individuals move beyond simple rule-following, conventional morality, to a framework of universal ethical principles. Idealists often operate at this level, but the same capacity for abstract principle can become a liability when it refuses to accommodate the messy, inconsistent, compromise-ridden reality of actual human life. You recognize the idealist by their language. They use words like should, must, ought to, and it's the principle of the thing. They have strong opinions about issues that most people have never thought about. They are disappointed in you more often than you expect, because you keep falling short of standards you did not even know existed, and they are exquisitely sensitive to hypocrisy in others and sometimes in themselves, though that self-awareness varies. The challenge with idealists is that their standards are often genuinely admirable, but their delivery makes those standards impossible to live up to. The idealist who demands perfect honesty in a relationship may be right about the value of honesty, but their all-or-nothing approach leaves no room for the normal human processes of learning, failing, and trying again. The result is that people around them feel judged rather than inspired. To relate well to idealists, acknowledge the truth in their principles without accepting the rigidity of their delivery. Say, "You're right that we should aim higher, and here's a realistic first step." Help them see that progress is not betrayal of the ideal, and if you are an idealist yourself, the work is to learn the virtue of patience, to hold your principles lightly enough to allow imperfect people, including yourself, to grow toward them rather than demanding perfection now. Law 30. Know the realist. The realist is the person who cuts through every conversation like a blade. While others dream, they ask about budgets. While others hope, they ask about timelines. While others feel, they ask about facts. At their best, realists are the ones who keep projects on track, prevent catastrophic optimism, and tell you the hard truths that everyone else is avoiding. At their worst, they are joyless cynics who mistake their own limited vision for the whole truth, who kill possibility with a sneer, and who leave everyone around them feeling smaller for having spoken. The realist's cognitive style is characterized by what psychologists call high need for cognition, combined with low openness to experience on the Big Five personality framework. They are drawn to data, to evidence, to what has worked before. They are suspicious of novelty, of untested ideas, of anything that smells like wishful thinking. This is a valuable corrective in many settings, but it becomes a cage when it closes off the very possibility of genuine innovation. You recognize the realist by their default response to any new idea. Before they say yes or no, they will ask, "What's the evidence? Who has done this successfully before? What are the risks? Show me the numbers." Their compliments tend to be about practical competence rather than creativity or warmth. Their criticism tends to focus on feasibility rather than values. In meetings, they are the ones who wait until the enthusiasm has peaked and then ask the deflating question that no one wanted to raise. The most effective way to work with realists is to bring data to every conversation. Do not try to persuade them with emotion or vision alone. They will not trust it. Instead, do your homework. Show them the pilot study, the budget projection, the comparable case. Acknowledge the risks before they raise them. And once you have earned their respect by speaking their language, you will find that realists can be among the most loyal and effective partners you will ever have, because they do not inflate expectations or abandon ship when things get hard. If you are a realist, the work is to recognize that your skepticism is a tool, not a worldview. Not everything that matters can be measured. Not every risk that is real should stop you. And sometimes the most rational thing you can do is to trust someone else's vision enough to take a leap you cannot fully calculate. Part 5. Social Dynamics: Power in Groups and Systems. Individual psychology is essential, but human beings do not exist in isolation. This section explores how power, influence, and behavior function in groups, and how to read those dynamics accurately. Law 31. Every group has an unwritten power map. Walk into any gathering of human beings, a corporate team, a family dinner, a social club, a group of old friends reuniting, and beneath the visible surface of the gathering, a hidden architecture of power is operating at all times. There are people whose opinions carry more weight than others. There are topics that can only be raised if a particular person raises them. There are alliances, rivalries, debts of loyalty, and unresolved grievances operating invisibly in every interaction. This is the unwritten power map, and reading it is one of the most valuable skills in all of social intelligence. Formal hierarchy and real power are often different things. The person with the biggest title is not always the person whose opinion most shapes the group's decisions. Power flows through networks of trust, information, and emotional significance in ways that organizational charts almost never capture. Research in network science, pioneered by scholars like Mark Granovetter at Stanford, has shown that weak ties, connections between people in different social clusters, are often more powerful than strong ties, dense connections within a cluster, for the flow of novel information and influence. Reading the power map of any group requires observing several key signals. Notice who speaks first and last in group discussions. Notice who others look at for confirmation when a decision is being made. Notice whose jokes land without explanation while others require an audience to warm to them. Notice who is visibly deferred to by others, whose name is invoked as authority in their absence. I talked to Maria and she thinks, and whose objections tend to delay or redirect group decisions. Pay particular attention to the information brokers in any group. The people who seem to know what is going on across multiple subgroups, who serve as connectors between different networks of people. These individuals often hold more real power than their formal status suggests, because their access to information and their position as nodes of connection gives them influence over how the group understands its own reality. Once you have a working map of the power dynamics in a group, you are in a far better position to navigate it effectively, to identify who needs to be on board for a change to succeed, who the informal gatekeepers of certain decisions are, and where the fault lines of tension or competition run. This is not about manipulation. It is about understanding the real social landscape you are operating in, rather than the idealized one in the official documents. Law 32. Coalitions shift faster than alliances. One of the most common mistakes in reading group dynamics is to assume that alliances are stable, that the person who supported you in the last meeting will support you in this one, that the coalition that won the last vote will hold for the next one. This assumption is almost always wrong. Groups are not families. They are temporary assemblies of self-interested individuals whose interests shift as the situation changes. Understanding this is the difference between being surprised by betrayal and expecting it as a normal feature of social life. The study of coalition formation in social psychology and political science, from the work of William Gamson on coalition theory to more recent research by political psychologist Philip Tetlock, consistently shows that coalitions are driven by instrumental interests rather than loyalty. People ally with those who can help them achieve specific goals in specific contexts. When the context changes, the coalition changes. This is not treachery, it is rationality, given the structure of most organizational and social systems. You can observe coalition shifts in real time by paying attention to who speaks in support of whom, and under what conditions. Notice the person who agrees with you vigorously when the boss is in the room, but is silent or even opposed when the boss leaves. Notice the team member who supports your proposal in private, but fails to raise their hand in the public vote. Notice the patterns of who leaves meetings together, who has lunch with whom, and who is suddenly friendly with a former rival after a reorganization. The practical implication is simple. Do not mistake temporary alignment for permanent loyalty. Build relationships that are robust to changing circumstances by focusing on genuine mutual interest and respect rather than on promises of allegiance. And when a coalition shifts against you, resist the temptation to feel betrayed. Instead, ask what changed in the interests of the people involved, and whether there is a new alignment that serves both of you now. Law 33. The loudest voice is seldom the most powerful. In almost any group, there is a person who talks the most, interrupts the most, and projects the most confidence. It is easy to mistake this person for the leader, for the most influential member, for the one whose opinion matters most. But this is a dangerous misreading. The loudest voice is often a sign not of power but of insecurity, of someone who needs to fill the space, because they are afraid of what silence might reveal. The truly powerful people in a group are often the quietest, because they do not need to prove anything. Research on group dynamics and participation patterns has consistently found that the relationship between talking time and influence is nonlinear. A 2015 study published in the journal Leadership Quarterly analyzed hundreds of team meetings and found that the person who spoke most was rated as influential only when their contributions were also perceived as high quality and relevant. In many groups, the most frequent talker was actually rated lower in influence because their verbosity was seen as a lack of self-awareness or respect for others. You recognize the quiet, powerful person by several signals. They speak less frequently, but when they speak, people listen. They ask questions that reframe the entire conversation. They are comfortable with silence and do not rush to fill it. They give credit to others liberally, which makes people want to credit them in return. And, crucially, they have the ability to end a discussion with a single sentence, not by demanding agreement, but by summarizing the consensus so clearly that everyone nods. To read power accurately, ignore the volume and watch the attention. Who do people look at when a difficult question is asked? Whose opinion is sought in the hallway after the meeting? Who is mentioned in other people's sentences as an authority? Well, as Maria pointed out, these are the signals of real influence. And if you want to project real power yourself, practice speaking less and asking more. The person who controls the questions often controls the conversation more effectively than the person who controls the answers. Law 34. Status is constantly being negotiated. Every social interaction is, simultaneously, a negotiation of status. This happens automatically, below the level of conscious awareness for most people, in virtually every exchange. In who takes the floor and for how long, in who defers and who is deferred to, in whose suggestions are built upon and whose are quietly ignored, in the seating arrangements at a table and the distance maintained in a corridor. Social psychologist Michael Chance introduced the concept of attention structure to describe the way status in primate groups is determined not primarily by aggression, but by attention, by who most reliably commands the gaze of others. In human groups, the same principle applies. Status accrues to those whose opinions, actions, and presence others orient toward. The highest status person in any room is not necessarily the loudest or the most aggressive. It is the person others most consistently attend to and reference. Status negotiation happens in remarkably small behavioral increments. The person who holds eye contact a beat longer than expected, who pauses before responding as if their reply is worth waiting for, who takes up physical space rather than compressing themselves into corners. These micro-behaviors collectively signal and claim status in ways that accumulate into a powerful social impression. In reading stat dynamics, pay attention to status anxiety, the visible discomfort that surfaces when someone feels their status is being challenged or diminished. It shows up in interruptions, in the compulsive need to remind others of one's credentials, in put-downs disguised as humor, in the tendency to name drop or credential drop. These behaviors typically indicate status insecurity, not status strength. The most secure high-status individuals in any group are typically the easiest to be around, because they are not performing or defending their position. They simply occupy it. They can afford to be generous with attention, credit, and acknowledgement, because their status is not threatened by others' success. Recognizing this quality in others and cultivating it in yourself is both a social intelligence goal and a personal integrity goal. Law 35. Conflicts reveal the true hierarchy. In calm times, everyone is polite. The junior person defers to the senior person, the new member follows the established norms, and the official hierarchy operates smoothly. But when conflict erupts, when resources are scarce, when egos are threatened, when a decision must be made that will have real winners and real losers, the polite fiction dissolves. In that moment, the true hierarchy of the group is revealed. You see who actually has power, who is merely a figurehead, whose alliances hold and whose crumble. This principle is well documented in organizational psychology. Researchers studying organizational justice and conflict resolution, such as Blair Shepard of Duke University, have found that the way conflicts are resolved tells you more about a group's power structure than any org chart ever could. Who gets heard in the heat of disagreement? Whose preferences shape the final outcome, even if they were not the most vocal? Who is sacrificed when someone must take the blame? Observing conflict for social reading requires restraint. Do not jump in immediately to take sides or solve the problem. Instead, watch. Notice who is approached by others to mediate. Notice whose anger is treated as legitimate and whose is dismissed as emotional. Notice who can break a rule without consequence and who is punished for the same infraction. The patterns that emerge in the first few minutes of a conflict are often the most honest data you will ever get about a group. For your own position in any group, understand that conflicts are opportunities, not to win, but to learn. The person who remains calm, who helps others save face, who finds the path to resolution that does not humiliate anyone, is often the person who emerges from the conflict with more influence than they had going in. Do not waste a good crisis by reacting emotionally. Watch, learn, and position yourself as the person who can see the hierarchy clearly without being trapped by it. Law 36. Information brokers hold the real keys. In every organization and social network, there are people who know what is happening across multiple subgroups. They are not necessarily the highest ranked or the loudest or the most charismatic, but they are the ones who hear about the merger before it is announced, who know that two colleagues are feuding before it becomes public, who can tell you which committee actually makes the decision and which one is just for show. These are the information brokers, and they hold the real keys to power. The science of social networks, pioneered by sociologists like Mark Granovetter and Ronald Burt, has demonstrated that influence flows through positions of brokerage, the gaps between different clusters of people. Burt's concept of structural holes shows that people who connect otherwise disconnected groups have access to unique information and control over how that information flows. These brokers are consistently more creative, more influential, and more successful in their careers than those embedded in dense, redundant networks. You identify information brokers by paying attention to who talks to whom. The broker is the person who seems to have friends in different departments, different social circles, different levels of the hierarchy. They are the ones who say things like, "I was talking to someone in finance and they mentioned," or "This is just between us, but I heard from a reliable source." They do not hoard information for power. They trade it because they understand that sharing strategically builds relationships. To build your own social intelligence, cultivate relationships with information brokers. Be useful to them. Share information you have that they might not. Offer genuine help without immediate expectation of return. And slowly, you will find yourself included in the flow of information that makes things happen. But remember, the power of information is ethical, only when used to build understanding and cooperation, not to manipulate or betray. The broker who becomes known as a gossip or a traitor loses their currency instantly. Part 6. Advanced reading high-stakes situations. When the stakes are high, the skill of reading people becomes even more critical. This section addresses the most demanding situations: deception, toxicity, and high-pressure dynamics. Law 37. Detect deception with clusters, not clues. If there is one area of social reading where confident simplicity is most dangerous, it is the detection of deception. The popular culture around lie detection, the wandering eyes, the covered mouth, the specific micro-expressions, the voice changes, has created a widespread and deeply damaging myth that there are reliable individual behavioral tells that indicate dishonesty. The scientific literature is unambiguous on this point. There are not. A landmark 2006 meta-analysis by Bella DePaulo and colleagues, reviewing 108 independent studies on deception detection, found that most people's accuracy at detecting lies is only marginally better than chance. Around 54%, barely above the 50% you would achieve by flipping a coin. Crucially, the meta-analysis also found that training people to look for specific behavioral cues tends to make them more confident in their judgments without making those judgments more accurate. What this means is that the behaviors popularly associated with lying, avoiding eye contact, touching the face, speaking haltingly, are not reliable indicators of deception. They are indicators of stress, nervousness, or cognitive load, which a person might experience for many reasons other than dishonesty. An innocent person being falsely accused will display many of these behaviors. A highly practiced deceiver will display almost none of them. The more reliable approach, used by professional investigators and trained intelligence analysts, is to look for clusters of behavioral change rather than isolated cues, and to measure those changes against the individual's own baseline rather than against some generic template of lying behavior. What is different about how this specific person is behaving in this conversation compared to how they normally behave? A cluster of multiple simultaneous changes in eye behavior, voice, posture, speech rate, and emotional expression when discussing a specific topic is more meaningful than any single change. Even more reliable than behavioral cues is content analysis. Paying close attention to what someone says and what they do not say, the specificity and consistency of their narrative, the presence or absence of peripheral detail. Truthful accounts tend to be rich in sensory and contextual detail, include spontaneous corrections and acknowledgements of uncertainty, and maintain internal consistency under questioning. Deceptive accounts tend to be more generic, more rehearsed, and more rigid under pressure. The final and perhaps most important point: approach this with humility. Even the best professional deception detectors, trained investigators with years of experience, make significant errors. In high-stakes situations where the consequences of false accusations are serious, erring on the side of caution and gathering more evidence before concluding dishonesty is not weakness. It is wisdom. Law 38. Read the unspoken contract. Every relationship, professional, personal, romantic, operates under a set of expectations that are almost never spoken aloud. These are the unspoken contracts. The assumptions about who does what for whom, what loyalty means, what constitutes a betrayal, what can be asked for and what cannot. Most relational trouble arises not from malice, but from mismatched unspoken contracts. You assumed one thing, they assumed another. Neither of you said it out loud, and now you are both hurt and confused. The concept of psychological contracts has been extensively studied in organizational behavior, particularly by Denise Rousseau of Carnegie Mellon University. Her research shows that unspoken expectations are often more powerful than written agreements in shaping how people feel about their work and relationships. When a psychological contract is violated, when someone does something that feels like a betrayal, even though it was never explicitly forbidden, the emotional reaction is as strong as if a written contract had been broken. Reading unspoken contracts requires asking yourself, in any relationship, what does this person seem to assume about how we should treat each other? Their assumptions reveal themselves in their reactions. When you cancel plans at the last minute, do they seem genuinely hurt or only mildly inconvenienced? When you ask for a favor outside the usual scope, do they seem happy to help or subtly resentful? When you succeed, do they celebrate or compete? These reactions map the boundaries of their unspoken expectations. The most powerful move you can make with any important relationship is to make the implicit explicit. At the right moment say, I want to make sure we are on the same page. Here is what I assume about how we work together. What do you assume? This kind of conversation can feel awkward, but it is far less awkward than the conflict that comes from mismatched assumptions. And it is the hallmark of someone who takes their relationships seriously enough to care about getting them right. Law 39. Identify toxic people before they strike. Most of the interpersonal damage we suffer in our lives does not come from random acts of malice by strangers. It comes from sustained relationships with people whose patterns of behavior are fundamentally incompatible with our well-being. People we stayed with too long because we did not recognize the pattern early enough, or because we kept hoping it would change. Learning to identify toxic patterns early is not paranoia. It is a form of self-care grounded in social intelligence. The clinical research on personality disorders associated with interpersonal harm is extensive. Narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and borderline personality disorder have each been the subject of enormous research attention. And while diagnostic labels are properly the domain of clinicians, the behavioral patterns associated with these conditions are observable to anyone who knows what to look for. Some of the most reliable early warning signs of a toxic relational pattern include a pattern of idealizing new relationships intensely, followed by devaluation when the other person fails to sustain the idealized standard, the love bombing, followed by inevitable disappointment. A consistent pattern of blame externalization, in which every difficulty is the fault of external people or circumstances and personal responsibility is consistently absent. A marked lack of genuine curiosity about your inner life combined with high expectations for your attention and energy. Inconsistency between private and public behavior that leaves you confused about which version of the person is real. And a tendency to test your boundaries, not just once but repeatedly, each time retreating slightly when challenged, but never truly accepting the limit. It is important to distinguish between people going through temporary difficulties, who may display some of these behaviors in extremis, and people for whom these patterns are the consistent baseline. We are all capable of moments of blame, of intensity, of inconsistency. What you are looking for is the pattern, the frequency, the pervasiveness, the response to feedback. Genuinely healthy people, when their problematic behaviors are named, experience some version of recognition and remorse. Those patterns were not who they were trying to be. Toxic patterns, by contrast, tend to double down when challenged. The behavior becomes more intense, the blame more elaborate, the self-defense more absolute. Trust the cumulative weight of your observations over time. If your gut is telling you, repeatedly and insistently, that something is wrong in a relationship, even if you cannot fully articulate what, take that seriously. The body often registers patterns before the conscious mind is ready to name them. Law 40. Trust your pattern recognition, not your hope. There is a specific kind of pain that comes from ignoring what you have seen with your own eyes, because you hoped so much that you were wrong. The colleague who has disappointed you 5 times, you tell yourself the 6th time will be different. The friend who always disappears when you need them, you tell yourself they are just busy, they will show up next time. The partner who has broken promises repeatedly, you tell yourself this time they mean it. This is not generosity, it is self-deception. And it is the single greatest obstacle to accurate social reading. Psychologists have studied this phenomenon under several names: optimism bias, wishful thinking, and what Daniel Kahneman calls the planning fallacy. In each case, the pattern is the same. Humans have a powerful tendency to overweight the possibility of positive outcomes, especially when we are emotionally invested. This tendency serves us well in many domains. It keeps us trying, hoping, persisting through difficulty. But in reading people, it is a dangerous weakness. People show you who they are through repeated behavior. Hoping they will become someone else is not kindness, it is denial. The practice of accurate social reading requires a discipline that can feel cold, but is actually compassionate. Believe the pattern. If someone has let you down in the same way 3 times, stop asking whether they will do it again and start asking how you will protect yourself when they do. If someone has consistently shown you that your needs are not a priority, stop hoping for a transformation and adjust your expectations. This does not mean ending every relationship with a flawed person. It means seeing them clearly enough to make decisions based on reality rather than fantasy. The most important relationship to apply this law to is the one you have with yourself. What patterns do you repeat? What hopes have you been clinging to that the evidence no longer supports? The courage to see yourself clearly is the foundation of all other clarity. Trust your pattern recognition. It has been gathering data for a long time. It is time to listen. Part 7. Mastering your own signals, projecting power. Social intelligence is not only about reading others, it is also about understanding and managing the signals you project. This section turns the lens inward. Law 41. Silence projects more power than words. In a culture that rewards talking, filling space, and having an answer for everything, silence has become a forgotten art. But in any interaction, the person who is comfortable with silence holds a distinct advantage. Silence creates tension, and the person who cannot tolerate that tension will rush to fill it, often with words that reveal too much, concessions they did not intend to make, or promises they cannot keep. The person who can sit in silence, relaxed and unbothered, controls the frame. The power of silence is well documented in negotiation research. In their analysis of hostage negotiation and high-stakes bargaining, researchers like William Ury have noted that skilled negotiators deliberately introduce pauses. They ask a question, then wait. They make an offer, then wait. They let the silence do the work of pressuring the other party to speak first, to reveal information, to make the next move. The silence is not empty. It is the most active part of the conversation. You can practice this starting today. In your next conversation after someone finishes speaking, count to 3 in your head before you respond. Notice how often they jump back in during that pause, adding more information, qualifying their statement, even changing their position. Notice how your own comfort with silence makes you appear more thoughtful, more confident, more grounded. The person who is not afraid of the pause is the person whose words carry the most weight when they finally come. But silence must be used with discernment. In some contexts, a friend in pain, a moment of shared grief, silence is not power but presence. The law here is not about strategic withholding in every situation. It is about learning that your words are more valuable when they are not constantly on offer. Speak less, and when you speak, let your words land in the quiet space you have created for them. Law 42. Your attention is your most valuable currency. In a world that is constantly demanding your focus, notifications, requests, distractions, the endless pull of other people's agendas, what you choose to pay attention to is not just a matter of productivity. It is a statement of values, and how you give your attention to others is one of the clearest signals of your social power. The person who gives their full, undivided, generous attention to the person in front of them is rare, and that rarity makes their attention incredibly valuable. Research on presence and charisma consistently finds that the ability to make others feel like they are the only person in the room is one of the most powerful social skills. Psychologists call this interpersonal responsiveness, and studies show that people who are high in this trait are rated as more likable, more trustworthy, and more influential. They are also perceived as higher status because their attention is clearly a gift they do not give freely to everyone. The practice of giving attention as currency means learning to be fully where you are. When you are in a meeting, be in the meeting, not checking your phone, not thinking about the next thing, not planning what you will say when the other person stops talking. When you are with a friend, be with them. The person who gives you their complete attention feels like a gift because in a distracted world it is. And the person who withholds attention, who is always half present, always looking at their screen, signals clearly that you are not a priority. To project power, give your attention generously to those who deserve it, and withhold it from those who do not. Do not let others pull your focus at their whim. Your attention is finite. Guard it. And when you give it fully. That combination, discernment and depth, is the signature of someone who knows their own worth. Law 43. Control your expressions. Control the narrative. Everything we have learned in this book about reading other people's expressions applies, with equal force, to your own, while other people are not analyzing you with deliberate attention. They are, like you, processing social signals at a largely automatic level. The cumulative impression you create through your expressions, posture, and vocal behavior shapes how others think and feel about you in ways that are profoundly consequential. The research of psychologist Nalini Ambady on thin slicing. The rapid, intuitive judgments people make from brief behavioral observations shows that our first impressions are formed with remarkable speed and durability. In one of Ambady's studies, subjects were shown 2-second silent video clips of teachers and asked to rate them on a series of qualities. Their ratings correlated at extraordinary levels with the ratings given by students who had spent an entire semester with those same teachers. 2 seconds of visible behavior contained enough information to produce impressions that matched months of direct experience. This is both alarming and empowering. Alarming because it means you are being read and judged constantly in ways you may not be aware of. Empowering because it means that becoming more conscious of the signals you project and more intentional about their quality can have an enormous impact on how you are received in the world. The practical work here is not about becoming a performer. It is about aligning your external signals with your internal reality. Much of what undermines people's social impact is not malicious intent but unconscious leakage. The exhaustion that reads as disinterest, the anxiety that reads as arrogance, the deep care that gets buried under a formal professional persona. The goal is to reduce the gap between who you actually are and what comes across. Start with your default expression, the face you wear when you are not actively managing it. Many people carry resting expressions of worry, judgment, or displeasure that are entirely at odds with their internal experience. A few sessions of honest mirror work, or better yet, genuine feedback from trusted friends, can reveal default expressions you never knew you had, and that have been shaping others' first impressions of you for years in high-stakes situations, presentations, negotiations, difficult conversations. Preparation includes physical preparation. Before entering, take a few moments to consciously settle your nervous system. Breathe deliberately. Feel your feet on the ground. Release tension in your face and shoulders. The signals you project in the first 30 seconds of any important interaction will set the tone for everything that follows. Enter grounded, and the narrative begins on your terms. Law 44. Dress for the role you want, not the one you have. The signals you send before you open your mouth matter enormously. The way you dress, the way you carry yourself, the objects you surround yourself with, all of these are read by others instantly and automatically, shaping their expectations of you before a single word of content has been exchanged. This is not shallow, it is human. The brain processes visual information faster than any other kind, and it uses that information to make predictions about competence, status, and trustworthiness. Research on enclothed cognition, pioneered by Harjo Adam and Adam Galinsky at Northwestern, demonstrates that what you wear changes not only how others see you, but how you see yourself. In their experiments, participants who wore a doctor's coat performed better on attention-related tasks than those who wore the same coat but were told it was a painter's coat. The symbolic meaning of the clothing affected cognitive performance. You are not just signaling to others, you are signaling to yourself. The practical application is not about expensive clothes or following arbitrary fashion rules. It is about intentionality. Ask yourself, in the context where I need to be effective, what does the role I want to play look like? What signals would that person send through their appearance? Then dress accordingly, not as a costume, but as an authentic expression of the version of yourself you are choosing to bring forward. A single well-chosen item, a quality watch, a clean pair of shoes, a blazer that fits, can shift the entire frame of an interaction. But the deeper law is this: never let your appearance do the heavy lifting that your presence should do. The best-dressed person in the room who has nothing to say will be forgotten. The poorly dressed person who speaks with wisdom and groundedness will be remembered. Use clothing as a tool, not a crutch. And remember that in most settings, the most powerful signal is simply appropriateness, the sense that you understand the context and have chosen to honor it with your presence. Law 45. Apologize rarely and powerfully. In many social contexts, people apologize constantly for taking up space, for having an opinion, for asking a question, for being slightly late, for existing. These automatic apologies are not politeness. They are status-lowering signals. Each sorry tells the world that you assume you are in the wrong, that your needs are less important than others, that you are bracing for blame. The habit of over-apologizing is one of the fastest ways to erode your own social power. The psychology of apology has been studied extensively, particularly by researchers like Aaron Lazare, author of On Apology. Lazare found that effective apologies have specific components: acknowledgement of the specific harm, acceptance of responsibility, expression of regret, and offer of repair. What makes an apology powerful is that it is rare and precise. The person who apologizes only when they have genuinely wronged someone, and who does so fully and without excuse, commands respect. The person who apologizes for everything commands nothing. To break the habit of over-apologizing, notice the contexts in which you say, sorry. Replace automatic apologies with expressions of gratitude or neutral statements. Instead of "sorry I'm late," say "thank you for waiting." Instead of "sorry, this might be a stupid question," say "I have a question I'd like to understand better." Instead of "sorry to bother you," say "do you have a moment?" The shift is subtle, but the effect on how others perceive you and how you perceive yourself is profound. Of course, when you have actually harmed someone, apologize fully and immediately. A rare, sincere apology is a powerful act of repair, but save your sorries for the moments that genuinely require them. Every unnecessary apology is a small surrender of your own standing. Stop surrendering. Law 46. Make people feel seen, and they will follow you anywhere. If you could take all 48 laws in this book and distill them to a single principle, the one that underlies and animates all the others, it would be this: the deepest human need, beneath approval and control and significance and all the rest, is the need to be truly seen. Not just noticed, not just acknowledged, but genuinely seen, perceived in the fullness of your complexity, known in the particularity of your experience, valued not for your performance or your usefulness, but for who you actually are. This need is so fundamental that it appears in the very first moments of life. Research in developmental psychology, particularly the attachment theory work of John Bowlby and Mary Ainsworth, demonstrates that an infant's capacity to form a secure, trusting relationship with the world depends entirely on whether their early caregivers are able to see and respond accurately to their internal states. When caregivers see and mirror the child's experience, the child develops what Ainsworth called secure attachment, a bedrock sense of safety and trust that supports healthy development in virtually every domain. When we fail to receive this seeing, when our inner experience is misread, dismissed, ignored, or punished, we develop various strategies to manage the pain of that invisibility. Perfectionism, people-pleasing, withdrawal, aggression, the relentless pursuit of external validation. All of these, at their root, are attempts to finally become visible to others in a way that feels safe. The extraordinary thing about the power of being truly seen is that it does not require you to give people everything they ask for. It does not require you to agree with them or support their every choice. It simply requires you to demonstrate, through your full presence and genuine attention, that you are aware of their inner reality and that it matters to you. This is what we mean when we talk about someone who really listens, not just the mechanical reception of words, but the active, curious, respectful engagement with another person's actual experience. Developing this capacity is the lifelong work of social intelligence, and it begins with a simple practice. In your next conversation, for just a few minutes, put down everything else, your phone, your own thoughts, your planned response, and give another person your complete, undivided, genuinely curious attention. Notice what changes. Notice what opens. Notice how they look at you when they realize, perhaps with some surprise, that you are actually there. The influence this practice creates is not the influence of manipulation or strategy. It is the influence of love, the oldest and most powerful social force in human experience. People follow, trust, and care for those who truly see them. It is as simple and as profound as that. Law 47. Comfort with uncertainty is the ultimate power move. Most people are desperate for certainty. They want to know what will happen, what the rules are, whether they are safe. This desperation makes them predictable, controllable, and anxious. The person who can tolerate uncertainty, who can sit in the not knowing without needing to fill it with premature decisions or desperate assurances, holds a kind of power that is almost invisible but absolutely real. They are the calm eye in every storm, the person everyone looks to when the situation is chaotic because they do not add to the chaos. The psychological construct here is intolerance of uncertainty, a trait that has been extensively studied in relation to anxiety disorders. People who are high in intolerance of uncertainty experience ambiguous situations as threatening and will go to great lengths to resolve ambiguity, even if their resolution is wrong. People who are low in intolerance of uncertainty can hold multiple possibilities in mind, wait for more information, and make decisions when the time is right, rather than when their anxiety demands. You can cultivate comfort with uncertainty through deliberate practice. When faced with an ambiguous situation, resist the urge to immediately seek resolution. Say to yourself, "I don't know yet," and that's okay. Notice the physical sensation of uncertainty in your body, the slight tightness, the urge to act, and breathe into it without reacting. Over time, the discomfort diminishes. What remains is a capacity to be present and effective in situations that would paralyze others. In group settings, this capacity reads as extraordinary confidence. While others are rushing to premature conclusions, you are calmly gathering information. While others are demanding answers, you are comfortable asking better questions. The person who does not need certainty commands something that certainty seekers will never have. The ability to act only when action is truly warranted, and to wait with grace until that moment arrives. That is power of the rarest kind. Law 48. The most powerful person in the room is the most grounded. We have arrived at the final law, and it is in some ways the simplest and the most difficult. Everything we have explored in this book, the reading of others, the understanding of influence, the navigation of groups and archetypes, the management of our own signals, ultimately rests on a single foundation: the capacity for genuine presence, equanimity, and self-possession in the face of social pressure. Groundedness, in the psychological sense, refers to the quality of being solidly in contact with oneself, one's values, one's emotions, one's sense of identity, in a way that is not easily destabilized by external events. It is the opposite of reactivity. The reactive person's inner state is determined primarily by what happens to them, by others' approval or disapproval, by success or failure, by the shifting winds of social dynamics. The grounded person's inner state has its own center of gravity, and while it can be moved, it cannot be swept away. Research on emotional regulation, a field that has expanded enormously in the last 2 decades, demonstrates that people with strong self-regulatory capacity are not only more personally resilient but more socially effective in virtually every measurable dimension. They handle conflict better, they are more accurate in their judgment of others, they communicate more clearly, and they are rated as more trustworthy and inspiring by those around them. Groundedness is not the same as emotional flatness or stoic detachment. The most grounded people are often deeply feeling. They simply have developed the capacity to feel their emotions without being governed by them. They can be moved without being swept away. They can hold complexity without collapsing into simplicity. They can remain curious and open in situations where most people become defensive and rigid. The practices that build groundedness are not secret. Regular physical movement, meditation and mindfulness practice, deep sleep, quality relationships, meaningful work, and the ongoing commitment to knowing yourself honestly, your patterns, your fears, your needs, your values. None of these are quick fixes. All of them, practiced consistently, build the inner solidity that allows you to bring your full social intelligence to bear in any situation. There is a reason that the most trusted, most influential people you have probably encountered in your own life seem to carry a certain quality of stillness even in motion. They are not performing composure. They have cultivated it over years of deliberate self-development. And because they are not preoccupied with managing their own anxiety, defending their ego, or calculating their status, they are fully available to every person they interact with, fully present to every situation they enter. That quality of full presence, that is the ultimate expression of social power. Not dominance, not cleverness, not charisma, just the profound and quietly radical act of being fully, groundedly, generously here. Conclusion. All the laws in this book are ultimately pointing toward a single integrated skill, The ability to walk into any room, engage with any person, and quickly build an accurate working model of the emotional reality around you. This final chapter gives you the practical scaffolding for doing that, quickly and naturally. The 5-minute people read is not a formula, it is a sequence of attention. In the first minute, read the environment. What is the emotional temperature of the room? Who is positioned near whom? What is the visible dynamic between the major players? Gather this contextual information before focusing on any individual. In the second minute, observe the person you are most focused on before interacting with them. What is their physical posture communicating? Is their body open or closed, expansive or contracted? What is the quality of their attention? Are they fully present or are they elsewhere? Notice their default expression, the one they wear between social performances. In the third minute, as you begin interacting, listen to their voice before processing their words. What is the emotional undertone? What is the pace and quality of their speech? Do the emotional signals in the voice match the content of what they are saying? In the fourth minute, ask one genuinely curious, open question and listen, really listen, to the answer, not just to the content, but to what they choose to lead with, what they linger on, what they quickly pass over. The geography of someone's attention in an open-ended answer is one of the richest sources of information available to you. In the fifth minute, check your reading against the evidence. What is your working hypothesis about this person's dominant need, their emotional state, and the unspoken concern most shaping their behavior in this moment? Hold this hypothesis lightly, as a working model, not a conclusion, and remain genuinely open to revising it as you gather more information. With practice, this sequence becomes a background process, something you do automatically, continuously, without visible effort. The goal is not to make you into a calculating observer of others, but to make you into a fully present one, someone who is genuinely, warmly, attentively here with the people in front of them, seeing them clearly and meeting them honestly. That, in the end, is what all of these laws have been building toward. Not a competitive edge, not a manipulative toolkit, but the rare and genuinely beautiful quality of full social awareness. The ability to see people as they actually are, and to meet them there with all the skill, care, and presence you have developed.